Hello everyone, my name is JT, and I like to cook and talk about science. However, today things are going to be a little bit different. I'm making pan pizza, and we're going to be talking about history, specifically the Bronze Age. Welcome to the first episode of Helping of History. In 1887, near the city of El Amarna, a group of local Egyptians made quite an amazing discovery. In the ruins of Akhetaten, an ancient Egyptian capital, were found over 300 stone tablets written in cuneiform. The vast majority of these inscribed tablets were letters written between the pharaohs of Egypt and the rulers of the surrounding countries. The letters, dated between 1360 and 1330 BCE, would help to define the way we view the era, giving us an exclusive look into the lives of people who lived 3,000 years ago. The period that the El Amarna letters were written is known as the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age saw a level of international trade and diplomacy that rivaled the modern world in its complexity. Let's go on an overview of the Bronze Age and its major players up to the point that it fell apart and gave way to the Iron Age. Although iron is typically more abundant than the rarer components of bronze, it requires a temperature of up to 1250 degrees Celsius or 2250 degrees Fahrenheit to melt. This temperature exceeded what was possible to achieve in the kilns and furnaces of the late Neolithic peoples, and therefore made metals with more moderate melting points the go-to for early metallurgy. Bronze is an alloy created by mixing copper with another metal, most commonly tin. At the start of the Bronze Age, generally decided to be around the 3000s BCE, bronze was the hardest and most durable metal that humans were able to create on a large scale. The sourcing of tin became the main problem in the production of bronze, as it is found in few places and very rarely alongside copper. While it is generally agreed that Cyprus, off the coast of modern-day Syria, was a principal source of copper, in fact, the word copper comes from the word Cyprus. It is still being debated where the ancients got most of their tin from. With copper and tin fueling so much of the Bronze Age life, from construction to warfare, it is no small wonder that some historians compare the ancients' dependence on it with our own dependence on fossil fuels today. In fact, it is possible that a disruption of the tin trade helped lead to the transition to iron at the end of the Bronze Age, and possibly even the collapse that we'll discuss later. Let's then return to the picture of the ancient world painted by the Amarna letters. The senders and recipients of these letters comprise what we would call the Middle East and Greece today. This handful of kingdoms and city-states clustered around the eastern Mediterranean Sea, with lanes over both land and sea connecting them to a vast international network of commerce and diplomacy, not unlike the state of global affairs today. The greatest and most famous of these Bronze Age nations were the Egyptians. By the time that the Amarna letters were written, Egypt was already an ancient country. The Great Pyramids of Giza were already 1,000 years old, and Egypt had grown to encompass all of the Lower Nile, the Sinai Peninsula, and much of the area of Palestine. Despite their power, the Egyptians had been occupied by invaders known as the Hyksos for nearly 200 years in the Mid-Bronze Age. Even so, the Egyptians seem to hold a special place of power in the Mediterranean, with one of the Amarna letters remarking that gold is as plentiful as dust in Egypt. As such, the letters are full of requests for money and assistance from the other regional powers. The main rival to Egyptian power in the Bronze Age were the Hittites, an empire established in what is now central Turkey in the 1700s BCE. Stretching from its capital in the city of Hattusa, the Hittite Empire eventually grew to encompass the Anatolian Peninsula, the Levant, and parts of Mesopotamia. Some of the earliest battles that we have concrete record of were fought between the Egyptians and the Hittites. The Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE, is the earliest battle that we know the general strategy and tactics of. It is thought to be the largest chariot battle ever fought, with upwards of 6,000 chariots involved. Also in Anatolia, to the west of the Hittites, is what is believed to be the ruins of the ancient city of Troy. It is possible that it was a tributary of the Hittites, or even a part of their nation outright. If there actually was a Trojan War, it definitely didn't involve interference from the gods or mythic heroes. It might have involved the next great power on our list, the Mycenaean Greeks. The domain of the mythical Agamemnon, Mycenae was the most powerful of the disparate Greek city-states at this time. Although the rise of the Mycenaeans is partially shrouded in mystery, historians believe that it is linked to the colonization of the island of Crete and the rise there of the Minoan civilization. Control of Crete gave the Greeks access to sea lanes going to and from Egypt, as well as the rest of the Near East, a boon that would see the Mycenaeans flourish throughout the Middle and Late Bronze Age. Joining these great powers were more minor players on the world stage, like Mitanni, a kingdom lying in the far east of Anatolia. Babylon, one of the earliest cities founded by humans, was also still kicking at this time, ruled by the Kassite peoples in modern-day Iraq. In the region of Syria and Palestine, the disparate Canaanite peoples ruled small kingdoms and city-states, usually under the sway of the Egyptians or Hittites. By the end of the Bronze Age, the Israelite Hebrews had also come to inhabit this area. All of these civilizations and more called the Eastern Mediterranean home during the Bronze Age. They formed what is possibly the first truly international society, an ecosystem of commerce, migration, and diplomacy that, in many ways, is indistinguishable from the one that we have today. It is a realm defined as much by trade as by war, and as much by friendship as enmity. To truly understand history, it is important for one to see things from all sides, to fully interrogate something until everything it can offer is laid bare. We work with what we have, and from there we use the evidence at hand to make sense of what we don't have. Thus, we move from the relatively well-documented era of the Bronze Age at its height to the morass of mystery that is the Bronze Age collapse. So what happened to the Bronze Age civilizations? That is a question that many historians are still asking themselves. Starting in the 1200s and ending sometime in 1100s BCE, the peoples and nations we have been talking about started disappearing. The lights of documentation guttering out one by one until eventually only Egypt is left, and even then in a much diminished state. The answer for many years seemed to be the civilization known only as the Sea Peoples. These nomads, who were not necessarily seafarers, appeared as a storm that broke out over the eastern Mediterranean, moving from place to place, toppling centuries-old kingdoms wherever they went. Only the Egyptians, under the pharaoh Ramses III, were able to defeat them. However, is it possible that this alone is what caused the veritable Dark Age that followed the collapse? If there is one thing that history teaches us, it is that there is never just a single cause for something. A more likely description of the collapse is that of a domino effect, with climate change and natural disasters causing population decline and the abandonment of cities. Add to this the large-scale advent of ironworking in the very late Bronze Age, adding fuel to the fire as it shook up the copper and tin-based economy. This, in turn, caused revolts and internal strife to weaken the great powers, and allowed foreign invaders like the Sea Peoples to do as they wished with little resistance. Regardless of what happened, when all was said and done, the globalized world of the late Bronze Age was dead. Historian Robert Drews claims that the Bronze Age collapse was more calamitous than the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Yet, if there is another thing that history teaches us, it is that every end is simply the beginning of something else. As the Bronze Age became the Iron Age, new civilizations rose up to supplant those that had been lost. The remnants of the Hittite Empire would retain much of their identity, forming what is known as the Neo-Hittite culture in its wake. Egypt would soldier on, albeit without their hegemony over the Near East. In Greece, the collapse of the Mycenaeans would lead to the rise of city-states such as Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and many more. Thus, a new world was born from the ashes of the old, and the march of history continues unabated. I hope you've enjoyed this trip through antiquity. While the study of science and the study of history seem to be at odds with one another, this could not be further from the truth. Just like the food we eat, our intellectual diet must include a balance of all things in order to truly benefit us. So, as always, remember to season your food with your heart, your mind with science, and never forget your regular helping of history. This episode was written by my brother Matt, a graduate student in history. For For anyone interested in learning more about today's topic, he recommends the book 1177 BCE, The Year Civilization Collapsed, by Eric H. Klein. It is a readable yet thorough explanation of the Bronze Age and its eventual collapse. Much of the information in this video was taken from the book, and if you have any recommendations for future episodes of Helping of History, let us know and you might see it in a future video.